This poem comes from a long poem called the Nunwell Letter, which attempts to imagine the spring of 1612 when John Donne's wife, Anne Moore, was on the Isle of Wight. Donne, the great metaphysical poet, had lost his employment when he married her. She was underage. She was the niece of his employers, and he married her without permission. And for those reasons, he was put in jail. He lost his livelihood. They were extremely poor. But he went from a very rakish, famously licentious life into a very committed marriage by all accounts. Anne died very, very young in childbirth with her 12th child, or 12th pregnancy. But this poem imagines the time when in 1611 she went to stay with her sister on the Isle of Wight. She was pregnant again with her 8th child. Donne had taken up a job to go to Europe and was leaving her on her own. And we think that he gave her, as a kind of a consolatory gift, the beautiful poem Valediction Forbidding Mourning, because she was so upset at being left with all her children and so worried. So Anne Moore is a silence in the literary record. There's no letters from her. There's no portrait, even though we know that she was his intellectual equal, that she was classically educated. So it was one of those gaps that really wanted, I think, to be written. So I'm imagining her on the Isle of Wight, having lost the child and writing a letter to Donne. He was in France at the time, and because of war between France and England, the letters weren't getting through. So this is the Nunwell Letter 6. During the baby's birth, I found that place I've told you of in my other labours, where time stops, and I am contracted into myself even as the body convulses. I was a child again in grandfather's library, surrounded by his beloved books, sitting in a puddle of sun by the tall windows in a different kind of abstraction. In the worst pain, almost as if knowing what I faced, I was Niobe turned to stone in grief, or Rhea smeared with the soilure of birth, her afterblood seeping into a dry riverbed, commanding the earth mother to create a new stream to clean her and her godchild. And then it was as if I had two souls and two sets of eyes, those of the child for whom this was all story, and those of the woman whose cold child is placed in her arms, a still ever-sleeping girl who I will never know. And in the moment of seeing her, it's hard to say this, but I wanted to follow her, John, and thought of your Bythanatos, but knew that God would not forgive my leaving our other children. And in the days of fever afterwards, I was betimes in our waking days of first glances at dinner, the thrill of passing one another close in busy corridors, first words, the hours of fascinated talk, and then nights it seemed we hardly needed sleep, and the quickening sense that I had found my life.